Ever wonder why the neighbor's hydrangeas look like a magazine cover, while others stay small, weak, and flowerless season after season? The difference is not better soil. It is not a better climate. It comes down to 7 silent mistakes that ruin thousands of American gardens every single season. Mistakes that are easy to fall into and even easier to fix once they are identified. Stay through to the very end, because the final tip is the one most gardeners never hear until after they have already lost a full season of blooms. Gardeners who find this channel and subscribe never have to search for answers again. Every solution, every fix, every mistake caught before it costs a season, delivered directly, automatically, before the damage is done. One click on that subscribe button, and the guesswork stops here. Mistake number 1. The wrong location. It is a frequent mistake to assume that a spot that looks bright is a spot that works. Hydrangeas are woodland edge plants by biological origin. They evolved under broken canopy of forest edges where morning light filters through freely and afternoon shade settles in naturally as the sun moves west. The gardener who places one of these shrubs in a south-facing bed with no afternoon relief, or in a wide-open sunny border in Georgia, Alabama, or Texas, is asking the plant to survive conditions that are complete opposite of everything its root system and leaf structure were designed for. Afternoon sun in zones 6 through 9 regularly pushes past 90 degrees Fahrenheit through the summer months. At that temperature, hydrangea leaf tissue scorches, blooms collapse within days, and the plant spends every ounce of available energy trying to cool itself rather than producing flowers. The common response is to water more frequently, and the watering provides temporary relief, but the location remains wrong. The plant will struggle through every summer until it is moved. Morning sun is not optional. A minimum of 4 to 6 hours of direct morning light is what drives strong, consistent bloom production. Without that light, growth becomes leggy, flower production drops significantly, and the shrub always looks like it is reaching for something just beyond its reach. The tree trap is where experienced gardeners make this mistake more often than beginners. Placing a hydrangea under a mature oak or maple feels like sound reasoning, dappled shade, organic leaf litter, a naturalistic setting that mirrors woodland conditions. The problem exists entirely underground. Mature trees extend shallow feeder roots far beyond the canopy drip line, and those roots compete aggressively for both water and nutrients. The hydrangea planted in that zone is engaged in a resource competition against a root system that has been claiming that soil for decades. Above ground, conditions look reasonable. Below the surface, the hydrangea is being quietly outcompete for everything it needs. The correct placement provides morning sun from the east, reliable afternoon shade from a structure, fence, or established planting to the west or southwest, and uncontested soil that is not already claimed by aggressive root systems. That single location decision shapes the long-term health of the plant more than almost any other factor a gardener will encounter. Mistake number 2. The wrong hole. Far too often, plants are squeezed into narrow holes that offer no room for expansion. The gardener sees a hole. The root system encounters a prison. And the damage that follows stays invisible for 2 or 3 full seasons before the plant begins its slow, confusing decline. The hole must be twice as wide as the root ball, not slightly wider, twice as wide. That specific dimension reflects how hydrangeas naturally feed and anchor themselves. These plants spread roots laterally, moving outward through surrounding soil to access water and nutrients. A hole that is only marginally larger than the root ball becomes a barrier, forcing roots to turn inward rather than radiate outward the way the plant requires. Depth introduces a separate and equally damaging error. The crown of the plant, the junction where the stem meets the root system, must sit exactly at soil level, not 1 inch below, not 2 inches below, flush with the surrounding grade. When the crown is buried below the surface, moisture accumulates around it, oxygen cannot penetrate, and crown rot establishes itself quietly. Crown rot is among the leading causes of hydrangea failure in American home gardens, and in the vast majority of cases, it originated on planting day when a hole was simply dug too deep. A narrow hole forces roots to circle within a confined space, and those circling roots do not self-correct once the plant is in ground. The circular pattern continues and intensifies. Over time, a circling root presses against the plant's own root flare and begins to restrict the upward movement of water and nutrients, girdling the stem from below in a process that looks, from above ground, like disease or unexplained decline. The plant weakens gradually, never dramatically, and by the time the real problem becomes visible, the damage has been accumulating for years. The fix is straightforward. Dig wide and shallow. Backfill with loose, amended soil that gives roots a welcoming, unobstructed path outward. Set the crown exactly at grade. Those three decisions eliminate one of the most common and most silent causes of hydrangea failure across every growing zone in this country. Mistake number 3. Ignoring potbound roots. Ignoring potbound roots is a silent path to a plant that refuses to grow. This is a mistake that happens in the 60 seconds between lifting a plant out of its nursery container and setting it into ground. 60 seconds that most gardeners skip entirely, and that the plant pays for across multiple seasons. Nursery hydrangeas spend months inside the same container. In many cases, well over a year passes before that plant reaches a garden center shelf. Throughout that entire period, the roots circle the interior walls continuously, searching for an exit that does not exist. By the time the plant reaches a gardener's hands, the outer root mass is frequently a dense, compressed layer of tightly wound, circling growth that has nowhere left to go. A simple check before purchasing reveals the severity of the problem. Turn the container over and examine the drainage holes at the bottom. When roots are visibly emerging from those holes in thick, coiled masses, the root system inside is severely potbound. That is not a minor inconvenience. It is a structural problem that will follow the plant into the ground unless it is corrected before planting. When a bound root ball is placed directly into garden soil without intervention, those roots continue exactly what they were doing inside the container. The surrounding soil provides no signal to change direction. They keep circling. A plant with a persistently circling root system establishes slowly, feeds inadequately, and never develops the lateral root spread that supports vigorous growth and consistent blooming. In serious cases, a circling root wraps progressively tighter around the plant's own root flare. The pressure builds the same way a wire tightens around a tree trunk over years. The restriction gradually cuts off the upward flow of water and nutrients, and the decline that follows presents exactly like drought stress or disease. Symptoms that send gardeners toward the wrong solutions because the real cause is hidden beneath the soil surface. The correction requires 60 seconds and nothing more. Before the plant goes into the ground, lay the root ball on its side and use fingers or a hand fork to pull the outer roots loose, directing them away from the center and outward. For root systems that are severely compacted, draw a clean knife down the outer surface of the root ball in 3 or 4 vertical lines. That scoring interrupts the circular pattern and prompts the roots to grow outward into the surrounding soil. After the single preparatory step, establishment accelerates, lateral spread strengthens, and the plant performs the way a gardener reasonably expected it to when money was spent on it at the nursery. If this information is already saving time and preventing costly mistakes, this channel is where that kind of guidance lives permanently. Subscribing takes one moment. What it prevents could save an entire planting season. Every new video arrives automatically. No searching, no guessing, no discovering a mistake after it has already cost a full year of growth. Now, 3 mistakes down and 4 more ahead, each one more specific than the last. Before moving forward, consider this honestly. Which one of these 3 has been happening in your own garden without a second thought? The wrong location, the wrong hole, or roots that went straight from a container into the ground without examination? Leave the answer in the comments below and include the zone, because what the soil needs in Zone 4 is a fundamentally different conversation from what it needs in Zone 8, and that difference shapes everything that comes next. Mistake number 4. Neglecting soil preparation. Gardening success is often undermined by treating soil like dirt rather than a living ecosystem. The soil surrounding a hydrangea's root zone is not neutral ground. It is a system that determines whether the plant feeds properly, drains correctly, breathes freely, and carries itself through the stress of an American summer. A gardener who digs a hole, drops a plant in, and fills it back with whatever came out of the ground has skipped the single most important preparation step available before planting day. 2 soil types cause the most damage to hydrangeas across the United States, and they cause it in completely opposite ways. Heavy clay soil, common throughout the Southeast, the Midwest, and large portions of the Mid-Atlantic, holds water far longer than roots can tolerate. After a soaking rain or a deep watering session, clay packs tightly around a root zone and creates a waterlogged, oxygen-deprived environment. Roots sitting in saturated clay cannot breathe. Decay sets in at the root tips first, then spreads inward, and a plant with deteriorating roots displays every visible symptom of drought stress: wilting, yellowing foliage, stunted growth, because damaged roots cannot deliver moisture upward regardless of how much water surrounds them. The gardener waters more in response. The roots deteriorate further. The cycle continues silently until the plant is beyond recovery. Sandy soil, prevalent across the Carolinas, Florida, the Gulf Coast, and significant portions of the Southwest, produces the opposite condition with identical consequences. Water moves through sandy ground so rapidly that roots make only brief contact with moisture before it drains entirely beyond their reach. A gardener working sandy soil can maintain a consistent watering schedule and still produce a chronically thirsty hydrangea, because the ground holds nothing long enough for the root system to absorb what it requires. Both extremes produce a plant that appears to be trying but never fully arrives. And both are correctable before the first plant goes into the ground. Amendment is the fix, not only inside the planting hole, but across the entire planting area. Aged compost worked into the surrounding soil improves drainage in clay and builds moisture retention in sand, addressing both extremes with the same material. Leaf mold, which is simply decomposed fallen leaves, constructs soil structure over time in ways that manufactured products cannot replicate. Well-rotted manure, aged at minimum 6 months, introduces nutrients and microbial activity that feeds the root zone long after planting day has passed. A gardener who spends 30 minutes preparing the planting area before a hydrangea goes in the ground is making a decades-long investment, because a hydrangea given the right foundation can thrive in the same location for 30 years or more. Soil pH is where many gardeners stop at the surface and miss the issue that matters most. The relationship between pH and bloom color in bigleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, is widely known. Acidic soil in the range of pH 5.5 to 6.0 produces blue flowers. Alkaline soil at pH 6.5 and above shifts those same flowers toward pink. That color relationship is real and worth understanding. But bloom color is not the most consequential reason to monitor pH closely. Soil pH governs nutrient availability at the root level. When pH moves too far outside the acceptable range, a hydrangea cannot absorb what it requires from the surrounding soil, not iron, not manganese, not the fundamental building blocks of healthy cellular growth. Regardless of how generously fertilizer has been applied, the nutrients sit in the soil. The plant continues to underperform, and the cause is never identified because the visible symptoms look exactly like a feeding deficiency when the underlying problem is soil chemistry. A basic soil test resolves this before it becomes a recurring frustration. Most U.S. county cooperative extension offices provide testing for under $10, and many offer it free during specific seasons. The test returns a clear pH reading alongside specific amendment recommendations calibrated to the local region. Gardeners working the acidic red clay soils of the southeast may find their existing pH already suits bigleaf varieties without intervention. Gardeners in the alkaline southwest, managing caliche soils across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, will learn precisely how much sulfur or acidifying amendment is required before a bigleaf hydrangea has any realistic chance of performing as expected. Oakleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea quercifolia, tolerate a broader pH range than bigleaf varieties but still perform at their best in slightly acidic conditions. Panicle hydrangeas, Limelight, Little Lime, Quickfire, are the most pH adaptable of the major cultivated varieties and establish reliably across a wide range of soil conditions from Zone 4 through Zone 8 without requiring intensive soil intervention. For gardeners who have struggled repeatedly with pH-sensitive bigleaf varieties, Panicle hydrangeas offer a practical and high-performing alternative while soil amendment work continues over successive seasons. The gardener who tests before planting, amends accordingly, and works organic matter thoroughly into the surrounding area is the one whose hydrangeas produce the blooms that make neighbors stop and ask questions. The one who skips this step is the one returning to the garden center the following spring, purchasing a replacement and placing it into the same unprepared ground. Mistake number 5. Surface watering. The name hydrangea traces directly to the Greek words for water and vessel. These plants carry their relationship with moisture in their name, and that relationship is genuine. But it is misunderstood in ways that produce serious, lasting damage in gardens across every American climate zone. Daily light sprinkles can actually be fatal. The most widespread watering error is frequency without depth. A gardener runs a hose or irrigation system across the root zone for several minutes each morning. The surface appears moist. The assumption is that the plant has been adequately watered. It has not. Frequent watering moistens only the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. The established root zone of a hydrangea sits 8 to 10 inches below the surface, and shallow watering never reaches it. Roots follow available moisture. When moisture consistently remains near the surface, roots remain near the surface. A plant conditioned to shallow watering develops a root system that is permanently vulnerable to summer heat, to a single missed watering day, to any stretch of dry weather. The moment conditions become difficult, that plant wilts dramatically because its roots have no access to the deeper, stable moisture reserves that carry a well-established plant through a dry week without visible stress. Deep watering once or twice per week, adjusted for zone and season, is the correct standard. In Zone 7 through Zone 9 during peak summer heat, twice weekly deep watering is frequently necessary to maintain root zone moisture at adequate levels. In Zone 4 and Zone 5, where summer temperatures are more moderate and soil retains moisture longer between sessions, once per week is often sufficient outside of extended heat events. Each watering session must run long enough that moisture penetrates a full 8 to 10 inches into the soil. Verification is straightforward. Press a wooden dowel or long screwdriver into the ground an hour after watering. If it slides to 10 inches without resistance, the moisture reached where it was needed. Mulch is not a finishing touch. A 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark, pine fines, or aged wood chips spread across the root zone, extending outward to the drip line, never piled against the stem, locks moisture into the soil between watering sessions, moderate soil temperature during heat events, and suppresses competing weeds that draw directly from the same water supply the hydrangea depends on. In Zone 6 through Zone 9, a proper mulch layer reduces watering demand significantly during summer months. In Zone 4 and Zone 5, that same layer protects the root zone from the freeze-thaw cycles of early spring that disturb shallow root systems during the critical window when new growth is just beginning to emerge. Return to the 2 plants from the opening of this video. The thriving hydrangea carried a clean, even mulch ring extending well beyond the base of the plant. The struggling one had bare, cracked, dry soil pressed directly against its stem. That single difference in ground management accounted for more of the visible outcome than almost any other factor in that comparison. Details at the soil surface are never minor. They accumulate into results. Mistake number 6. Pruning without knowledge. Thousands of potential blooms are lost every spring in American gardens due to a lack of understanding about old wood and new wood. Every spring, across every growing zone in this country, gardeners walk out with clean pruners and genuine care for their plants, and remove every flower the shrub was preparing to produce. The loss will not be understood until summer arrives, and the plant stands green, leafy, and completely flowerless for the entire season. This is the most heartbreaking mistake on this list, because the effort was real, the intention was sound, and the result was still a loss year that cannot be recovered. The cause is straightforward. Different hydrangea varieties produce flowers on fundamentally different types of growth, and most gardeners were never given that information at the point of purchase. Bigleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, the classic mophead and lacecap varieties found in gardens from Connecticut to California, bloom on old wood. Flower buds for the following summer form on the current season stems in late July and August. Those buds overwinter on the canes and open the following year. Any pruning that removes those canes, whether during fall cleanup or early spring tidying, removes the blooms entirely. No buds remain to open. The season is lost before the soil warms. Oakleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea quercifolia, follow the same old wood pattern. Native to the American Southeast and exceptionally resilient once established, they set flower buds on the previous season's growth and must be treated with identical timing consideration. Panicle hydrangeas, Hydrangea paniculata, including Limelight, Little Lime, Quick Fire, and Pinky Winky, bloom entirely on new wood produced in the current growing season. These varieties respond well to a hard cutback in late winter or early spring with no sacrifice to the flower display. A clean late winter pruning on a Panicle hydrangea consistently produces stronger stems and larger bloom clusters than leaving the plant unpruned. Smooth hydrangeas, Hydrangea arborescens, including Annabelle and Incredible, also bloom on new wood and perform reliably after a hard late winter cutback. These are among the most forgiving varieties available to American gardeners and established consistently from Zone 3 through Zone 9. The Endless Summer Series introduced reblooming bigleaf hydrangeas that flower on both old and new wood, which provide some buffer against timing errors. Even these varieties, however, produce their most abundant displays when old wood canes are preserved through winter rather than removed during seasonal cleanup. The rule that applies across every variety is this: never prune a hydrangea without first identifying what it is. Determine the variety. Understand whether it blooms on old or new wood. Time every pruning decision accordingly. For old wood varieties, the only safe pruning window is immediately after blooming concludes in summer, not in fall, not in spring. For new wood varieties, late winter before new growth emerges is the correct and productive window. Removing dead canes and crossing branches is appropriate at any time regardless of variety. But removing healthy cane growth from an old wood bloomer outside the correct window guarantees a flowerless summer with no path to recovery until the following year. For gardeners in Zone 4 and Zone 5, the pruning decision connects directly to winter bud protection, and that connection will be addressed completely in the final section of this video. This channel exists because these are the details that change outcomes in real American gardens. Subscribers here receive every new video automatically, every zone-specific tip, every variety-level detail, every fix before it becomes a frustration. Subscribing costs nothing. What it delivers is a garden that performs the way it should, season after season. Now, before the final mistake and the expert tips that close this video, one question worth answering in the comments. What hydrangea variety are you growing? And have you ever pruned it at the wrong time without realizing it until the bloom simply never came? Leave the variety, the zone, and what happened, because the experience of one gardener in this community is often a warning another gardener needed before making the same mistake. Mistake number 7. Skipping the hardening process. The excitement of a new purchase often leads to the error of rushing the plant straight into the ground. And that single decision, made in a moment of enthusiasm at the garden center, sets back every other effort a gardener makes, regardless of how carefully the location was chosen, how wide the hole was dug, or how thorough the soil was amended. Nursery hydrangeas are grown in controlled greenhouse environments. Consistent watering on precise schedules. Filtered light through shade cloth overhead. Regulated temperatures that never spike or plunge. The plant that sits on a garden center bench has never experienced full outdoor sun, unpredictable wind, or the kind of temperature variation that is completely ordinary in an American garden from May through September. Moving that plant directly from a greenhouse conditioned environment into a fully exposed garden bed is not a minor transition. It is a dramatic environmental shift that the root system and foliage are entirely unprepared for. Transplant shock is what follows. It presents as wilted within the first few days, leaf edges that brown and curl, foliage that drops without obvious cause, and growth that stalls completely for weeks. Gardeners who encounter these symptoms almost universally reach for watering can or begin investigating soil conditions because the visible symptoms point in every direction except the actual cause. The plant is not diseased. It is not root-bound. It is not in wrong soil. It is simply overwhelmed by transition it was never given time to prepare for. The hardening process eliminates this entirely, and it requires nothing more than patience and a week of deliberate attention. On the first day, place the newly purchased hydrangea in dappled outdoor shade for 3 to 4 hours. A location under a tree canopy on a shaded porch or on the north side of a structure works well for this initial exposure. Bring the plant back inside or into a sheltered position for the remainder of the day. On the second day, extend outdoor exposure by 1 to 2 hours. Continue increasing daily outdoor time by the same increment across a 7 to 10 day period. By the final day of the process, the plant has experienced real outdoor light, natural wind movement, and ambient temperature variation in a graduated way that allows its cellular structure to adapt without crisis. A hydrangea that has been properly hardened off goes into the ground as a prepared plant. Root establishment begins immediately rather than being delayed by recovery from shock. Foliage holds without browning. Growth resumes within weeks rather than stalling for a full season. The gardener who takes 10 days to harden off before planting is investing that time once and collecting the return across every subsequent growing season that plant produces. Planting timing compounds this significantly, and it is an area where the assumption that hydrangeas can go in the ground at any convenient point in the season costs American gardeners more failed plantings than almost any other timing error. The two ideal planting windows for hydrangeas in the United States are early spring, after the last frost date has passed and before summer heat establishes itself, and early fall, while soil temperatures remain warm but air temperatures have begun to moderate. Both windows give the root system time to settle into the surrounding soil under conditions that are not simultaneously hostile. Summer planting. Dropping a hydrangea into ground in June, July, or August across most American growing zones forces a vulnerable, unestablished plant to fight heat stress and moisture demand simultaneously before its roots have developed any capacity to support that effort. The plant spends its entire first season surviving rather than growing, and many do not survive at all. Zone-specific timing matters considerably. In Zone 7 through Zone 9, fall planting consistently outperforms spring planting because the extended warm soil window that runs from September to November allows substantial root development before the ground cools. The plant enters its first winter with an established root system rather than a fragile one. In Zone 4 and Zone 5, early spring planting is a safer and more reliable window. A fall planted hydrangea in Zone 4 has limited time to establish roots before the ground freezes, and an unestablished root system in frozen ground is a significant survival risk. Early spring planting in these northern zones gives the plant a full growing season to develop before facing its first hard freeze. In Zone 6, both windows are viable, and the choice often comes down to what is available at the nursery and how well the gardener can commit to consistent watering through a fall establishment period. This is the seventh mistake, and it is frequently the one that makes all the others worse. A plant in shock from an abrupt transition cannot recover from a poor location as readily as a well-established plant. It cannot push roots through amended soil with the same urgency. It cannot compete for moisture against tree roots or compensate for shallow watering. Every other mistake on this list hits harder when the plant arrives in the ground already stressed. Now, with all 7 mistakes identified, what follows is the section of this video that was promised at the very beginning. The tips that experienced gardeners carry and rarely share. The details that separate a garden full of struggling hydrangeas from one that produces the kind of blooms that make people slow their cars down on the street. Stay with this, because what comes next is where the real difference is made. Root competition is a hidden enemy that operates entirely out of sight. Most gardeners understand that planting directly under a large tree creates shade, but shade is only the surface of the problem. The root systems of mature trees, particularly oaks, maples, and sweet gums, extend laterally well beyond the visible canopy edge. These feeder roots run shallow, often within the top 6 to 8 inches of soil, and they claim moisture and nutrients from a far wider area than the tree's above-ground footprint suggests. A hydrangea planted within that root zone is not simply sharing resources. It is competing against a system that has been establishing itself in that soil for decades, with a root mass that dwarfs anything a newly planted shrub can produce. Professionals avoid these zones entirely, or they create raised amended beds that give the hydrangea its own distinct soil environment above the competing root layer. A raised bed of 12 inches or more, filled with quality amended soil, places a hydrangea's root zone above the aggressive lateral roots of surrounding trees, and allows the shrub to develop freely without constant resource competition below the surface. This approach works effectively in Zone 5 through Zone 9, and is particularly valuable in established landscapes where desirable planting locations are already occupied by mature tree root systems. Deadheading is another area where common practice diverges from what actually produces results. The instinct to remove spent blooms as frequently as possible feels productive, and with many flowering plants it is. With hydrangeas, the approach requires more precision than most gardeners apply. Deadheading a hydrangea does not produce additional blooms within the same season the way it does with annuals or repeat blooming roses. What it accomplishes is the redirection of the plant's energy. When spent blooms are removed, the plant stops directing resources toward seed development and redirects them toward root strengthening and stem development, investments that produce stronger growth and more abundant flowering the following season. The precision required is in the cut location. Remove spent blooms just above the first healthy, full set of leaves below the bloom, no lower. Cutting deeper than that point on old varieties risks removing dormant bud tissue that was already forming for next season's flowers. On newer varieties like Panicle and smooth hydrangeas, deadheading can be done more freely throughout the season without the same risk, but the same principle applies. Remove only what is spent and cut just above healthy foliage. Fertilizer timing is where well-intentioned gardeners cause damage they do not recognize until following spring. The assumption that a tired-looking plant in late summer needs feeding is understandable. The result of acting on that assumption is damage that takes a full season to become visible. Nitrogen-rich fertilizer applied after midsummer, after late July across most U.S. growing zones, stimulates the production of tender new vegetative growth at precisely the moment the plant should be slowing its above-ground activity and directing energy downward into root consolidation. That tender new growth has no time to harden before the first frost arrives. Frost kills it. The plant enters the following spring with frost-damaged canes, weakened stem tissue, and reduced capacity to support the bloom production the gardener was hoping to encourage. The correct fertilizer schedule for hydrangeas in American gardens is a single application of balanced, slow-release fertilizer in early spring as new growth begins to emerge, followed by one additional application in early summer if growth appears to need support. After that, feeding stops completely. The plant is allowed to slow naturally, consolidate its root system, and prepare for dormancy on its own timeline. The gardener who follows this schedule consistently will see stronger canes, more abundant blooms, and a plant that enters spring with genuine vigor rather than frost-weakened growth that must be cut away before the season can begin. Now the final tip, the one promise at the opening of this video, the detail that most gardeners never receive until after they have already stood in front of a flowerless shrub in July and wondered what went wrong through the entire winter. Winter bud protection. For gardeners growing old with bloomers, Bigleaf hydrangeas and Oakleaf hydrangeas, in Zone 4 through Zone 6, this is the single most impactful action available between the end of the growing season and the beginning of the next. The flower buds that will open next summer are already present on the canes right now, formed in late summer and waiting through the cold months to open when warmth returns. Those buds are alive. They are not dormant in the way the rest of the plant is. They are vulnerable to temperature extremes, to freeze-thaw cycling, and to the desiccating wind that moves across exposed canes through a northern winter. When those buds are killed by winter conditions, not by pruning but by cold and exposure, the plant leaves out normally in spring, produces healthy green growth, and then produces no flowers. Everything looks right until the moment it becomes clear that nothing is coming. That is a winter bud loss, and it is entirely preventable. The first method is mulching the crown. After the ground begins to freeze in late fall, typically November in Zone 5 and Zone 6, October in Zone 4, apply 4 to 6 inches of shredded leaves or with chips across the root zone and up over the crown of the plant. This insulating layer keeps the crown temperature stable through freeze-thaw cycles that would otherwise stress the bud tissue at the base of the canes. The second method, essential for Zone 4 and Zone 5 gardens and beneficial in exposed Zone 6 locations, is a wire cage filled with dry leaves. Drive 4 wooden stakes into the ground around the plant. Wrap them with chicken wire or hardware cloth to form a cylinder, and fill that cylinder loosely with dry fallen leaves after the plant has gone dormant. The leaf mass acts as insulation, maintaining a temperature inside the cage that stays measurably warmer than the ambient air outside it. The buds on the canes inside that cage arrive at spring the condition they were in when they formed, intact, viable, and ready to open. The third method applies to plants in exposed locations or containers that cannot be moved indoors. Wrapping the canes loosely in burlap after dormancy is a stab which protects the bud tissue from desiccating wind, without trapping moisture against canes in a way that promotes rot. The burlap comes off in early spring as temperatures stabilize, before new growth begins to push from protected buds. The gardener who does this work in October-November is the one whose hydrangeas are covered in full blooms the following July while neighboring plants stand green and bare, and their owners search for explanations that the soil, the watering schedule, and the fertilizer routine cannot provide. The answer was always in the winter. The buds were always there. They simply needed someone to protect them. That is what this comes down to across all 7 mistakes and every expert detail covered in this video. Hydrangeas are not difficult plants. They are specific plants. They ask for the right location, the right soil preparation, the right hole dimensions, properly managed roots, deep and consistent moisture, informed pruning time to variety, a respectful transition from nursery to garden, and protection through the months when the garden looks like nothing is happening but everything is actually being decided. A gardener who gives them those conditions does not need luck. The blooms follow naturally, reliably, season after season, in a way that looks effortless from the outside because the work was done correctly from the beginning. If any part of this video identified something that has been costing blooms season after season, share it. A like on this video puts this information in front of gardeners who are standing in front of struggling plants right now and have no idea that the solution is this specific and this achievable. Subscribing to this channel means never walking into a planting season without the information that makes the difference. Every new video, every zone-specific detail, every variety level fix, delivered without searching, without guessing, and before the mistake has already been made. That is what this channel exists to provide. Leave a comment below with the one mistake from this list that changed how the garden will be managed going forward. Include the zone and the variety being grown, because there is one question worth sitting with after everything covered in this video, and it is this. If the buds that would produce next summer's blooms are already forming on the canes right now, and winter is approaching, what is currently standing between those buds and the cold that could take them before spring ever arrives?